Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Crooked Illness. As you guys can see from the title, we're going to be talking about art expression of body dysmorphia today. I'm really excited to bring this conversation to you guys after the chat I had with today's guest, Alex Rudin. Alex is a multimedia artist based in New York City. She attended the Parsons New School for Design and is the owner and founder of Rubin Studios. I'm so excited for you guys to hear all the incredible work Alex has done through her artwork, especially when it comes to visually illustrating body dysmorphia. I look forward to hearing her story along with all she has to share today. It's going to be such a good episode and getting into how she has overcome struggles she has faced in the past, you guys. So I'm so excited to introduce her to you guys. So without further ado, welcome Alex to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you here because just like I said, in the intro, you guys, we had such a good chat. We hopped on a Zoom call, got to know each other a little bit better. She was talking to me about all the stuff she's up to, all the things she is working on, all the things she has been through. So I'm so excited to bring this conversation to you guys today. So before we go ahead and dive right on into the episode, I would love if you could share a little bit more about your story and experiences with us, about having the eating disorder and the ways that art has been helpful to you in communicating these experiences to others.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is a great opportunity just even talk a little bit about what body dysmorphic disorder is
Yes.
because it's a very underrepresented aspect of mental health, and it has a lot to do with other mental health disorders such as OCD or other eating disorders. So just to talk a little bit about what it is it's a mental health disorder in which sufferers fixate on one or more perceived defects or flaws in their appearance. A flaw that appears minor or can't be seen by others specifically. So this warped perception of oneself often leads to avoiding social contact, and their perceived flaw and repetitive behaviors cause distress and significantly impact their ability to function in daily life, something that I've experienced for most of my life, especially adult life. But had that being said, I've always been an extremely creative person. I am also a very emotional person. And the synthesis of these two facets of my life was, eminent. And for much of my life, I've struggled with dysmorphia and disordered eating, and having an eating disorder is excruciatingly lonely and isolating. So recovering from an eating disorder has been, the longest and most difficult process of my short life. I'm only 25, but those who have walked down this road know that recovery is not linear, and eating disorders have no size and no shape, no color, no religion, no gender, and simply they don't discriminate. And this is a battle that I fight constantly, every day, really. The voice inside my head tells me that I'll never be good enough in this body of mine. It tells me that no matter what I achieve, if I'm still this weight, it won't really matter. It makes me paranoid, and it makes me fearful of socializing. It makes me feel, quite simply ashamed. And yet my artwork says something different. Art has taught me more than really any book or article, but it's taught me the most valuable lesson of all, which is that my value really has nothing to do with my body. And it often feels as though my outward appearance and internal dialogue are kind of like two separate people, and I feel that the shame that I carry with me on a daily basis infiltrates every aspect of my life except my artwork. And the studio is really essentially the only place where I kind of feel those shackles of my eating disorder falling by the wayside. In college, which was really the height of my eating disorder, I felt I was kind of faced with a choice, was my eating disorder going to, no pun intended, but consume my creative spirit, or would my art work, to heal those cutting and critical voices in my head? And I knew kind of all too well that these two aspects of myself were either going to destroy each other or kind of come together to heal one another.
Wow.
And I'm still on that journey.
Wow. I just love the whole thing, and I love too how you kind of gave that, explanation of what is body dysmorphia? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then also kind of tying that into like how your artwork has been so helpful. And like, I like how you bring up, like more that you've learned more from this than, any article or any book or
Yeah.
any class or
Yeah.
anything. And just really being able, just to like, just express yourself and dive into that without hesitation or without fear, without, like you said, those
Yeah.
shackles of, struggling with an eating disorder, which is, not, for anyone listening who has ever had an experience with that or, has struggled with that in the past or is currently struggling with that, it is, of course, not an easy thing to deal with, not an easy thing to experience. So having something, that is an outlet or a way to kind of express this to others and kind of like try to explain, your experience to other people through this kind of medium, I think is really
Yeah.
powerful and like just incredible. So that's why I really got excited because I think this is such an important topic, and especially, like you said earlier, that is not really, I feel like it's not talked about as much as other things, as like talked about as much as depression or, anxiety or, bipolar disorder or just mental illness in general. I feel like, I haven't heard as many conversations about
Sure.
eating disorders or
Yeah.
about, body dysmorphia. And I also like how you tie that to, being linked to, a lot of other struggles as well. It's not
Yeah.
just that on its own, it's not
Sure.
just and I think that this episode is going to be, really helpful to like clarify that and kind of give an explanation of like, what has this been like for you, and to hear from your
Yeah.
perspective, what is it, the reality of it, because I feel like, we could all go online and, do some research and look up different
Yeah.
things and read different books. But I feel like it's so different when it's coming from somebody who has, lived this experience and gone through these things that can actually tell you, well, this is what this was like for me in college, going
Yeah.
through, the height of your eating disorder at that time. So, and I also love how it's kind of tied into, the mental health aspect as well. So I'd love to kind of, ask you about that. So, if you could kind of tell me about the impact that body dysmorphia had on your mental health. And was there anything in particular that was especially helpful to you in overcoming those challenging times?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, it's important to kind of emphasize that this is an ongoing battle for me, and that
Yes.
there's like not really any part of me that feels like I have, per se overcome this, and that it's a process and a journey, and that anybody else who feels that way, like, that's super normal. Everybody always said that like this is going to be like the longest process of your life, and they're not wrong. It's very long, but having like said that, having a deep experience with like the uncomfortable complexities of like what it means to inhabit a body in general, like my work addresses questions of feminism and patriarchal social constructs, and living in the age of technology, I feel like has quite literally and figuratively like warped our minds into thinking
Mhm.
that our natural state is like a glitch
Oh,
or
yeah.
something to be fixed or remedied in order to be accepted. And I feel like this specific body of work highlights the very real threat that like our current society poses, and we live in a world where like physical perfection is like the silver bullet for happiness, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
rampant increases in like body dysmorphia disorder and eating disorders are the result of that. And by exploring like the correlation between psychological states and expression of the human form, I try to peer into like that moment where like societal pressure and psychology meet, where expectation and acceptance clash, and where reality and like non-reality diverge. And I think that like last point of reality being non-reality, or distorted reality, if you will, is really kind of the culmination of what, or kind of like the the pinnacle of kind of what dysmorphia is.
Mhm.
It's an experience in visual reality testing, right? So, and of which you have none. So basically everybody tells you that what you see is not real. So having that, or being told that about yourself because you really don't understand it or can't see it, literally cannot see it, is a super destabilizing experience, right? It almost makes you feel crazy. Like, how can I not be seeing
Yeah.
what's real? And like, what else in my life is not real too? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that how you kind of tie that to, what we can see and what we can't see, and the whole expectation of, a lot of what we see on social media, or like when you get online and, the comparison game, right? Of like
Yeah,
seeing people and saying, oh, well, if I was that way, then I'd be happier, right? And I feel like we kind of got into this last time of like this correlation of almost, once I meet this point, then I'll be happy. Or once I
but that
look
doesn't
this
exist,
way.
right?
Yes, right. And it's constantly moving, right? It's constantly shifting. So like once I feel this way or look this way, or get my body to be like this, then I'll be good. Right,
Right.
you said it's never ending. It's never
No,
ending. It keeps continuing, continuing,
exactly.
continuing. So I think that's so important to bring up, because this is something that I feel like really, really like caused me to like just really, really relate to you on this, because this is something that I've dealt with as well, struggling with body dysmorphia, and like in looking at myself in the mirror and seeing, of course, like when you see yourself in the mirror and you're seeing, different parts of yourself, and you're not happy with this, and you're trying to, how do I fix this? How do I make this better? But then, someone else might look at you and say,
Right.
well, this person is, perfect. Like she looks, incredible, amazing, all these things. But then the person they're talking about doesn't feel like that at all.
Right.
It's so, because
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? Because we see, we might have this idea in our heads of ourselves, but then other people have like an entirely different one when it comes to, our bodies and how we feel
Right.
about how we look and how we feel in our bodies. And, if we feel comfortable, if we feel uncomfortable, all these things, because, it is pretty wild that you honestly really never know, just based on,
Yeah.
appearances. And you could see somebody, walking down the street, or, out in public, or, on Instagram or something. And, we could sit there and see that and say, wow, this person is just, beautiful, and, looks so happy and like full of life and exciting and all these things that are great and amazing. But then that person might not feel any of those things at all.
Right. And I
So
think that like kind of brings up the idea of like, the invisible aspect of like just mental health in general. And also it combined with eating disorders and also dysmorphia, because it's such an internal process, and like being the daughter of like a physician, like kind of that dichotomy of like, how do I express, I think this is something that young people with eating disorders struggle with a lot, is how do I express I'm in pain because people can't see it, right? And for me, at least, it was like, I, dropped a bunch of weight. I got very sick. And that was the only way for, it's the idea of being action minded rather than like emotion minded and trying to
mhm.
explain yourself or whatever, which I think a lot of people who have eating disorders struggle with, directly saying what they need or what they want from people. And trying to make the pain visible is something that I think is intrinsic or like really deeply associated with eating disorders or body dysmorphia, because it's such an isolate to have something happening in your mind that nobody else can see is so secretive and isolating that, like it feels like nobody really can understand what you're going through. And you get to the point where like you kind of give up on trying to explain it to people, right? And I think that I
Yes.
kind of like use my like being able to share my work around my recovery has been like so fruitful in numerous ways, like connecting with others who have struggled with similar issues has made me feel like way less alone. And
Mhm.
while having like personal and professional support systems that are amazing, like having an eating disorder, as I said, is like the ultimate experience of isolation. No matter who loves me or tries to help, there's always like a constant negative dialogue in my head. And now, as a result of sharing my work and my story, consequently, I know that I'm in fact like not alone. And I think people know that, logically, but they don't feel that way. So like reaching
Yes.
others who have suffered
Mhm.
from this disordered eating in like a positive and productive manner has been like key in my attempt to like relinquish the solitude of my disorder. And in addition to like sharing my story and dysmorphic artwork, it's kind of the definition of like exposure therapy, if you will, which is like a recovery method that I'm all too familiar with. And anybody who's been in like eating disorder treatment is probably all too familiar with as well. So while exposure like invariably brings about, like anxiety and fear and, those types of feelings, like the subsequent relief of that is unparalleled, really. Like talking openly about my journey has led me to take like another serious look in the mirror and understand that this is not the end of my journey, and there's still like
Yes.
really plenty of work to be done. But however, like I really can safely say that like sharing my artistic experience of dysmorphia and my own interpretation of that, like I'm one step closer to like healing that specific part of myself.
I
You know?
love that. And I love how you also bring up the part of the invisible, right? The invisible
Yeah,
that comes along with, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, the mental health struggle aspect of things that we can't see, things that we physically can't see with our eyes of when we're looking at someone else or when, even when we're talking to someone else, right? Because that we wouldn't know unless that person, tells us or lets us know, what this is, what's happening. We would never know, right? And that brings me back to, another part of our conversation that was just like this, like the similarities between us, when we got into talking about this correlation between sexual abuse and eating disorders and
sure.
having you, share your experience with that with me. And then also kind of me sharing a little bit of my experience and just being like, wow, like this is something that, we've both experienced at such a young age and kind of, especially like you said, something that's invisible that is, hard to express and talk about and put out there and tell people close to us, like tell our parents, tell our friends, tell our family, and how this kind of ties in, at least for both of our experiences with the eating disorder aspect. So I would love if you can kind of get into that, because I just found that so
Sure.
interesting, like that when you brought that up, and then also like having gone through that myself, I was like, wow, like the way that she just described this was, I can really relate to that and kind of like have just a lot of similarities with that. So,
Yeah,
how that ties in. So it's kind of like, this is something that we both experienced. So I would love to kind of, hear your thoughts on the
yeah.
role sexual abuse has played in your eating disorder.
Sure. So, for me at least, it's kind of like a very similar thing that I talked about earlier about like the idea of secrecy and isolation. And, you know, when you're young and you experience something like that, it's, we don't really, society doesn't really give us the tools to deal with those things. Like, let's be
Hmm.
real.
And you were 14.
Yeah, I was just
14.
going to high school. And it's still something that I feel like is kind of a secret, like I don't feel like I talk about it with people in my life very often because it makes people uncomfortable. But,
Hmm.
in my own person, and that still has lasting effects on me because um it's a huge part of myself, and it's something that informs much of my life and also work, but I feel like in general, like when you experience sexual abuse, your body becomes the enemy, right? So
Hmm.
it's the thing that is violated, and the thing that's no longer good, and the thing that you kind of most resent, right? So I feel like for me at least, it was a place that facilitated my trauma. And eating disorders allow you to like reject your body for what it is and value, and place on a pedestal a different you as the best you,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's an effort to run away from your experience and your body, like the body that brought you pain, or the body that was like consequently hurt by such violation. And I felt like sexual abuse immediately places notions of unworthiness and unlovability on your body and yourself. And eating disorders are kind of like a direct reaction to such traumas, and really emphasize those ideas of not being good enough or not being worthy, and really the emphasis on the body in regards to like those types of psychological processes. But in addition, I feel like both experiences are extremely isolating,
Hmm.
like as I said, and like there are parallel notions of secrecy and shame surrounding both issues. And I think shame is really something to highlight. Like, I most women I talk to, I would say every, but I don't really want to make a blanket statement, but
Yeah.
feels incredible shame around um, experiences of sexual abuse, right? Like, is this your fault? Or, there's so many things, right?
Yes. Oh
And
my gosh.
I think that, when there are parallel notions of secrecy and shame surrounding both issues, right? Because for me, as I said, like the eating disorder was probably the most isolating thing. Dealing with like abuse, the sexual abuse I went through when I was younger, like, um, definitely informed all of that for sure, and emphasized like the severity of my eating disorder and those feelings. But you know, when they're together and they feed off of each other, again, no pun intended, like
Yeah.
they really create, every time I talk about food, I
I
find
love
I'm making like ant food analogies with my words or
yeah.
whatever. But whenever they're together, it really creates like a perfect storm for like feeling horrible about yourself, right? Or like
Oh
not
no,
valuing
yeah.
yourself, or just thinking you're garbage, essentially. And it's really unavoidable because you can't, you also feel like nobody can relate to you. So you're not going to talk about it. You're not going to deal with those feelings. You're going to make them worse, because the less, for me at least, the less that I ate, the more impacted my brain functions became. You know, there was a point where I could barely like formulate sentences. And my therapist was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, she didn't, and I'm a very articulate person on the general,
Yes.
but it was a really big issue. And I think that those, you know, it is very clear that there's a huge correlation between sexual abuse and people who suffer from eating disorders. And I think it's really that concept of rejecting your body because something terrible happened to it, and that you want to
Yes.
run away from that, you know?
I love how you bring up that aspect of shame and having that in there, because that is definitely, like, for me at least, I really, really felt that. And, you know,
Yeah,
having both of us, you know, kind of experience this, you know, it's such, you know, you were 14 and I was 15, right? So it's like being so young, but also like kind of, you know, having that. And I like how you talk about, like, the way you talked about it, like you were saying, you know, having that relationship with the sexual abuse and the eating disorder as like a way to, you know, it's having that shame inside of you and like not knowing how to express that, because you feel like you could make other people uncomfortable, because that's what I
sure.
felt too, you know, being so
Yeah,
young. And I'm like, you know, every time I, you know, would think of, and because I would sit there and I'm like, this isn't, something is going on here that isn't right. Like, it's not working. I'm not feeling good. But then you talk
yeah,
about the two of those feeding off each other. And I think that's so
yeah,
important, because, you know, when we really think about these things, like when we sit here and we think, you know, where do these things come from? Like, when someone has an eating disorder, like where is that stemming from, right? Because there's
yeah.
usually always like something that took place, like an
Yeah,
event, some
it's
kind of
never about
trauma.
someone just wanting to be thin. That's important to
Yes.
emphasize. It's never that. There's always something that is the
Something.
roots of the problem, right?
Yeah, and that's what I think is so important to get into and talk about, because I feel like, you know, maybe there's some people out there who really don't understand it. You know, maybe they're like, you know, I don't know, you know, where this comes from. You know, maybe they just can't
Yeah,
understand it. They're like, I don't know why people just don't eat, why they, you know,
right,
purge and just don't, and
right.
do this to themselves. You know, people are just don't understand it. But when you talk about, you know, going through sexual abuse or some kind of trauma, whatever it may be, or whatever event it was, and how that impacted that person, and if that person, you know, doesn't talk about it, and it stays there and it just
Right.
festers inside of you, and you're,
Yeah.
you know, you're wanting to, you know, come out of that place, you're wanting to move forward, but you're
Yeah.
feeling like, what if I, you know, what if I do this and I talk about this and I put it out there, and then I feel even worse, because you already feel bad to begin
Right.
with, right? You already feel, you're already carrying around, you know, that shame and all these feelings of, you know, being hurt. And this is, you know, feeling all these things, but then it's scary, right? Because you're making yourself vulnerable. You're talking about something that is, you know, a huge, big deal that has really impacted you, and you don't know how the people you're saying these things to are going to respond, or how they're going to take
Yeah.
this, or what they're going to
Definitely.
say. And then, you know, what if they, and I feel like it's just that it makes it really hard to come out of that, because, you know, especially when you have, you know, two things that are kind of, you know, like you said, like feeding off each other. Like, you have the eating disorder, and then the sexual abuse, and then those things are still there, and, you know,
Yeah.
you're not really knowing how, like, how is there a way to come out of this? You know, that's
Yeah.
what
I
happens
think,
is.
yeah. And I think that something also really important to note here, like in regards to the eating disorder specifically, is that at least for me, and I'm, you know, I've been in a lot of group therapies for eating disorders, and I think this is pretty general. You know, people use symptoms to feel better, right?
Mhm.
It's a way that people try and regulate their feelings, right? So I'm not going to eat because it makes me feel good, or it gives me a sense of high afterwards. Like for me, I felt this, like, you know, this ineffable quality of like being high in a way, you
Mhm.
know, like not like
Yeah.
stoned, like that kind of
Yeah.
high, but like really elevated, you know. I felt
Yes.
really elevated and accomplished and proud of myself for restricting or not eating or doing, or, you know, binging on exercise or whatever, any type of thing like that. And when you have trauma in your past or your life that you're, dealing with or not dealing with, because I've been in therapy for a very long time and I think I'm constantly trying to deal with these things, that like you find coping mechanisms, right? And eating disorders or using symptoms of eating disorders are coping mechanisms, right? And I think that that also is really important to emphasize, that it's not just about like, you are sexually abused and then you get an eating disorder because you hate your body or you hate what happened to your body. But no, you're also trying to soothe yourself from the traumas that happened to your body and your
Yes,
mind
yes.
by using these eating disorder symptoms that invariably like make you feel better,
Yeah,
right?
and I feel like another aspect of that is like it reminds me of control. Because at least for me, like
Yes.
feeling so just out of control with, with that having, the sexual abuse having taken place and not knowing how to get away from that or how to like stop having, just all these thoughts going on in my head of, you aren't enough. You are, all these negative things that, I was constantly telling myself and just feeling so out of control. And like, how do I take control back? How do I try to move forward in my life after this stuff happened? Like there has to be a way, there has to be some way to do this. And I feel like that was what I did. I didn't, I started to become very, very critical of myself because I blamed myself. I felt bad. I felt, disgusting, shame, all these things. And, as a result of that, really started to not treat myself well, really started
Yeah.
to not like myself. And,
Why didn't you give us the opportunity to do that? You know what I mean? We're not
yeah.
taught to take care of ourselves in that way. Like we need to be taught mindfulness and all these DBT skills in school. Children need to learn about them. So when they go through something like this, they don't invariably, like they don't turn to coping mechanisms that hurt them, right? But they learn how to do things that are positive for themselves. And it starts really with education and teaching our young ones, like there are other options than hurting yourself and like coping with bad things, right?
Yes, I love that so much. And just like talking about, teaching this too, because that was something that like what you said right there, I was never taught any of that. I was never
Me either.
taught
Yeah.
anything related to like
Neither were our
mindfulness or
parents, right?
yes. And
That's
I
why they
feel
teach
like
us.
yeah, and I feel like it's just it's hard because like being so young and you're like trying to like hold your shit together and just make it through the day, like go to school and you're dealing of course like you're dealing with all this other shit, like just trying to grow up in general. And now it's like what do I and you're constantly being reminded of at least for me like that abuse that took place like on a daily basis, like whether through like your nightmares or just constantly replaying in your mind and trying to get away from it, trying to run away from it. So, that was what I did, and it was really, hard because, and especially, and I think this is why I love these conversations so much because getting into this, like, is not, it's not always like the easiest conversation. It's not like we're out here like, tell me
Yeah.
your favorite hike. Like,
Yeah.
what do you like to do in your, like, it's not like this is what we're doing, but I think that doing this is so helpful because, like you've lived this, you've experienced this. And I know like, still constantly every single day, you are still dealing with this and still kind of, navigating and like trying to just continue to live your life with having had these experiences. And I think it makes it so like I just get so excited about it because it's just letting people know this is what this was like and this is what this looked like. And you never know, someone could be listening to this and saying wow, this conversation could really help my sister or my brother or my friend or somebody, and you don't know. So I just think it's so amazing to just continue doing this and everything that you're doing with like your artwork and expressing that and like putting that down into something that people can actually see, right? Because we talk about all these invisible components related to we don't know what anyone is going through, right? Because we might think we really know somebody so well, and it's like one day they just tell you this happened or I'm going through this, and you're like blown away. You're like, I would have never known that, would have never thought that. And that's what I really love about art is you're able to show that and like have that be something that people can see and look at and interpret and understand and like form their own conclusions from what you're putting out into the world, and really being able to express that through especially body dysmorphia, which is something that's so and it's so sad too, like just knowing that there's so many people out there who are dealing with that and have dealt with that, and like
And probably don't
whether
know
it's
about it too. I think that's the
yes
thing.
Yes. And other,
There's
and
so
people,
little research done on body dysmorphia specifically. It's almost shocking. Like
yeah.
the same amount of work, like research that I found when I made the first iteration of dysmorphia, which was my thesis in college,
Yeah.
is the same amount of research that is out there now.
Oh my
And very
gosh.
little
Yeah.
personal testimony, very little personal account. I mean, the artwork personally is like what you would think, kind of just like the tropes I think of eating disorder artwork is kind of like, squeezing the squeezed body, or someone looking in the mirror and it's fat in the mirror but it's
Mhm.
skinny on the person, and it's
Yeah.
this very one-dimensional representation of what these experiences are when so many people go through them, but there's so little to show about what that experience is, and like
Oh
that's an
yeah.
issue. It's such an issue.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally think that's so true. And like just the fact that you're continuing to like try to add more to this and make it so it's more, there's more information out there on this, right? So people aren't, always seeing these. Because I definitely know what you're talking about. I've seen so many of the photos, like, where there's someone looking in the mirror and,
Right.
like in the mirror, they look way bigger than how they actually are. They're really, really small. And you're kind of seeing that and being like, oh, so that's kind of what it must be like. And, and that's kind of what people would think, right? When we see a picture or when we see something, we look at the picture and we think something. When from seeing the photo,
Right.
we think, okay, well, this is what the picture is probably trying to tell us. This is probably what's going
Right.
on. So I love how you do that, in your artwork. And I'd love to kind of ask you, when
Yep.
bringing up that point of like the invisible and the invisible components, through your artwork, have you been able to convey, like, in what ways have you been able to do this? Like, convey the invisible components that often go along with either mental health struggles or body dysmorphia.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that one thing like I like to emphasize before I talk about my work, like the dysmorphic work, is that like this is my own visualization of my experience. And I don't ever want to, put this work out there and be like, this is what dysmorphia is for everybody, because
Okay, so it's you.
dysmorphia,
It's like your
this is
personal.
my
Okay.
translation. This is my experience. And which kind of makes sense within how I do work for my own progress within recovery, right? So it's really like a personal attempt to try and visualize what I'm seeing. But, in an attempt to translate those thoughts and feelings to the canvas, like I found that making the invisible visible was really like an invaluable tool to help better understand and comprehend my disorder. And being able to do this for myself was like not only a learning tool, but also a connection to others with similar issues. And the ineffable qualities of consuming art are like, for me, simply like transcendent. And like art allows the viewer to sit in introspection and to question oneself, like no matter what the discomfort level. And I believe the same to be true in overcoming an eating disorder. Like we must confront to overcome, and we must like reflect to progress. And art allows us to tap into the recesses of our minds to like expose the complexes like at the core of our psyches. And to me it's really all about agency. Like what choices will you make to silence the voices of your eating disorder? And personally, like I leveraged my artistic voice and like trusted that it would lead me down the road of recovery. Whether it
Wow.
be writing or music or visual arts, using some sort of creative expression will open your mind and like enable you to access the invisible, right? And once
Wow.
you
I
make
love
the
that.
unseeable seeable,
Yes.
it loses its power. Like, they say seeing is believing. And, but in this case, I feel like seeing allowed me to lose belief in the power of my eating disorder.
Oh my
And it allowed
goodness.
me to take possession of my
Yes.
own narrative and like put the eating disorder in the back seat. And like, while I know that like we're probably going to be driving around together forever, like I'm in the driver's seat, and that's control, you know?
Wow. I just I love that, and especially how you bring up the point of reflect to progress. I love that. I love that because like you said, and also like the agency piece of like what am I going to do about this, and how you also like I love it. Just like the way you describe things, of being in that driver's seat and like knowing, this be with the eating disorder is probably going to be there, in my life forever, but it's not in control anymore. It's not That's
Right.
not the thing that's here,
And
driving.
that's the choice. You and I discussed
Yes.
previously on our call, like choice, there really is so much choice. You and I both believe that like everything really is inherently a choice.
Yes.
And this is kind of what that is. It's like, your efficacy to kind of like take control over your eating disorder by kind of taking the power away. And for me, that is um, able to be done by making these invisible aspects of my own mental processing visible. And I think that would be similar, the same for everybody else who can almost objectify their struggles. Do you know what I mean? It takes the
Yes.
power away and
Yeah.
takes the personality out of it and makes it an object in some way.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh. And this, I feel like I could just talk to you all day long about this and like all these topics and everything. But because this really, I love like visual representations of things like that because it just
Yeah.
really helps, at least for me, helps me really see something in a
Yeah.
different way and I love it. And I think it's, I would
A
just,
learner.
yes, I love it. Oh my gosh. And that brings me back to, the final question that I really want to ask you. And I always love asking people this because it's so
Yeah.
interesting to kind of see, what they think and what they say. So if you could give your younger self any one piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, I love your question, but I'm going to change it to three pieces of advice.
Okay. Okay.
I couldn't decide. There's a couple of things,
Yes.
I like, there's 3 points that I want to talk about here. One, and I'll go into depth about them, but like one, my body is not my worth. Two, perfectionism is unattainable and not worth your time. And three, focus on body neutrality, not positivity. So, pretty simply, perfection doesn't exist. And it is subjective, unattainable goal that will like quite literally eat away at your confidence and self-efficacy, especially if you're trying to become somebody else's version of perfect, right? So beauty lies to me in diversity and individualism. And, the aspects of us that make us special and unique are the perfect pieces of ourselves. They exist innately without any modification or treatment to the body. And, I think that perfection is really like the soul of your ancestors living through you. And, that's a little hippy dippy thing, but that's how I feel. But like, it's like, for me, quite simply, like the widow's peak that I inherited from my mom and like the big thick thighs that I got from my grandma, and like the artistic talents I got from my grandpa, the thirst for knowledge from my dad, the love of history from my other grandmother. And like, whether these traits are visible or unseeable, they're all pieces like of the fabric that make me me. And like that in itself is perfection enough. And, personally, talking about body neutrality, I'd like to say I'm more dedicated to the concept of body neutrality, which essentially encourages one to like accept the body that they are in and focus on its achievements rather than its appearance.
I love it.
I feel that like all too often we fall into this societal pull of like black and white thinking, right?
Yes.
So like within the lens of your body, within the lens of body positivity, that translates into either hating or loving your body. And body neutrality provides an opportunity for middle ground and acceptance. And like me, I've struggled tremendously with the body positive movement and unfortunately have never really reached a place of love when it comes to how I view my appearance. And within the body positive movement, the pressure to love your body is intense, especially if you struggle with an eating disorder.
Yes.
And it often makes me feel like upset or not good enough based simply on the fact that I'm not able to look at myself with such compassion and acceptance like that these other girls do. And it seems like a world where like only positivity is acceptable. And that's like, for me, is not the reality of eating disorder recovery. And it's not all positive and it's not easy. And like that being said, the goal of body neutrality is to like dial down the enormous significance that's being given to the physical attractiveness in our society. The concept, it really pushes back on all aspects of society that continue to promote beauty as like essential, consequential, and like the ultimate accomplishment. And the idea is to like remove one's worth from their appearance and refocus it on other accomplishments, which is something that like I'm able to gain great confidence in. And focusing my worth on aspects of myself other than my body has really like allowed myself to see myself as like a whole person and like not a shape. And I
Yes.
think that
Oh
that's
my
what I would
goodness.
tell myself.
I love that. I love that so much. You are just so much fun to talk to. Like the way that you just describe these things and like, oh my gosh. And I love that, like the whole aspect of perfectionism and like having that be a piece of, something you would tell your younger self, because I can definitely, definitely relate to that. I wish, if that was a thing, right? If that was
Like,
able to, could you imagine, like, if that was able to be a thing where we're like younger and we have this like just our future self like pop up and like a little holographical thing, and it's like,
I
here's the piece
know.
of advice, and you're just like,
Like, what the hell are you
wow,
talking
like
about?
what is that? What is that? Where did that come from? But wow, like
Yeah.
that's something that I wish I had back then, because I feel like it just, you can tie that into anything with perfectionism, like
Yeah.
trying to be perfect in your family or in your career or in around your friends or whatever like aspect of your life. You're striving for this idea of perfect. And like you said, when of course when someone else has this idea for you and you're striving to reach that, their idea of perfect for you, that's a thing too. And I think is so important just to like really put that out there, that it is damaging, when we're constantly looking at, okay, and I feel like it's almost like a thing that I feel like I used to always see around me, especially when we're in school, right? We're taught, you want good grades, like you want to get A's. And like, if you don't, it's like not really a good thing. Like if you fail the test, that's
Yeah.
bad. Like don't tell people, like you're failing your classes. That's not good. So, I think that's such an important part to bring up. And I just, oh my gosh, I love this episode. I love talking to you. I can't wait to put it out. So tell everyone, like, where can they get more of you? Where can they find you? Where can they follow you? All of the good stuff.
Oh, for sure. So basically, I've got many ways to follow me. So you can, my website, I have a portfolio website, which is alexrudin.com. Follow me on Instagram. It's underscore Alex Rudin. I don't remember what that symbol's called.
Yeah.
Um, underscore Alex Rudin. And then I also have a shop. My company is called Rudin Studios LLC, and I sell prints and, other little pieces of merch. And you can visit rudinstudios.com to check out my apparel and prints as well. Feel free to
Amazing.
shoot me an email if anybody wants to email me as well. I'm all
Yes.
about that email life.
What's the email? What's the
My
email?
email is allieroserudin@gmail.com. But if you go to my
Okay.
Instagram, it's up there.
I will put all this in the notes, you guys. It'll in the description. So definitely check her out. She's amazing, incredible, such a fun ball of energy. I loved this talk and this chat. And on that note, you guys, I'm going to end the episode here. And of course, thank you so much, you guys, for listening as always. I hope that you have a great, great rest of your day. And thank you, Alex, for coming out on Crooked Illness and having this chat with me, sharing your story, getting into these experiences, and just offering so many incredible pieces of advice and tips and all of the things that you did today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. All right. Bye, guys. And bye, Alex. Bye.
Bye.